All right, today we are diving deep into the Byzantine Empire, and let me tell you, it gets messy. We're talking about one of its most, well, complicated figures, doesn't even begin to cover it. Emperor Andronikos I Komnenos. His story is just this insane roller coaster, a lesson in how a hero can become a monster. And it ends with, well, one of the most gruesome public executions you can possibly imagine.
So let's just start at the end, because honestly, you have to hear this to believe it. For 3 straight days, the guy who was basically the ruler of the known world was tied to a post in Constantinople, and the citizens, they just took him apart, piece by piece. They shoved filth in his face, poured boiling water on him, and paraded him on a sickly camel. In the grand finale, they hung him upside down in the hippodrome, and soldiers were literally taking turns to see whose sword could plunge deeper into his flesh. It's beyond brutal.
So the huge question is, right? How does this happen? How do you go from being the hero marching into the city, the guy who's going to fix everything, to being literally torn to shreds by the same people? That's the mystery we're going to unravel. To get it, we have to look at the empire he was trying to take over.
So, before Andronikos storms back onto the scene, the Byzantine Empire looked pretty good from the outside. I mean, the Komnenian dynasty had been in charge for over a century, and they'd really brought back a lot of the empire's power and glamour, the so-called Komnenian Restoration. But it was like a beautiful mansion that was secretly being eaten from the inside out by termites. There was a golden age for sure, but it was standing right on the edge of a cliff.
And the tipping point? It all kicks off in 1180. The Emperor Manuel I, a real powerhouse, dies. And who does he leave on the throne? His son, Alexios II. A 10-year-old boy. A kid running one of the most powerful empires on Earth, yeah, that's never a good sign. It's basically an open invitation for chaos. And there were these 2 huge problems just boiling under the surface, ready to explode. First, the old emperor, Manuel, had been really friendly with the West. He let all these Italian merchants, the Latins, basically take over the economy. And the local Greeks, they absolutely hated it. And then problem number 2. The regent in charge for the boy emperor was his own mother, Maria of Antioch. Not only was she a foreigner, a Latin herself, but everyone saw her as corrupt, just lining the pockets of her friends and, you guessed it, more Westerners.
So let's just recap the situation, okay? You've got a kid on the throne, a regent everybody despises, a government that's totally corrupt, a city just simmering with rage against foreigners, and oh yeah, enemies like Hungary and the Seljuk Turks are nibbling away at the borders. The whole empire was just desperate for a strong leader, a real Byzantine, to come in and save the day. And wouldn't you know it, someone was waiting for exactly this moment.
And right into this perfect storm rides Andronikos Komnenos. Now this guy wasn't just some politician. He was like a character straight out of a myth. He's over 60, but he's still handsome, incredibly charismatic, and has this dangerous edge to him. He looked like the answer to everyone's prayers.
I mean, his life story was already legendary. He was the late emperor's cousin, and he'd spent 12 years locked in a prison for plotting against him. Then he stages this incredible escape and spends the next 15 years as this wandering adventurer. And get this, he has scandalous affairs with not 1, but 2 of his own nieces, one of whom just happened to be the Queen of Jerusalem. Yeah, this was a guy who did not care about the rules.
And he was a genius at political PR. When he shows up in 1182, he doesn't play the part of a power-hungry usurper. Oh no, he's the reluctant hero. He's only there, he says, to protect the young emperor from his evil mother and her corrupt friends. He promises to clean house, end corruption, bring back Byzantine pride. And the people of Constantinople, who were so desperate for a hero, they just ate it up. The army, the navy, they all flocked to his side almost overnight.
But that hero persona? It started to crack almost immediately. The second he got a real taste of power, the savior of the people, well, he morphed into a paranoid monster. The promised glorious restoration turned into an absolute reign of terror.
His takeover was just brutally efficient. Step 1, he lets the mob's anti-Western anger boil over and does nothing to stop a horrific massacre of all the Latins in the city. Step 2, he gets rid of the regent, Maria, by forcing her own son to sign her death warrant, and then he has her strangled. Step 3, he gets himself crowned as co-emperor. And then, just 2 months later, the final move, the little boy emperor, Alexios, is strangled with the bowstring. Problem solved.
And let's just stop for a second on that massacre. The number, 60,000, is probably an exaggeration, but the violence was very, very real. An absolute bloodbath. Men, women, children hunted down in the streets. They even beheaded a representative of the Pope and tied his head to a dog's tail.
This might have made him popular at home for a hot second, but it put the empire on a collision course with the entire Western world. Then, to make his rule legit, the now 65-year-old emperor marries the fiancée, now widow, of the kid he just had murdered. Her name was Agnes of France, and she was 11. 11 years old. It was just a shocking, cynical power play, even for back then, all to cement his claim on the throne.
And at first, he actually did some good things. He really did crack down on corruption and tried to break the power of the rich aristocrats who were basically squeezing the life out of the provinces. He stopped the practice of selling government jobs. For the average person living outside the capital, things actually got better for a little while. But that didn't last. His reforms quickly became a paranoid witch hunt. He had spies everywhere. If you were a noble and he even thought you were disloyal, you'd be arrested, executed, or, well, you'd get his favorite punishment.
And that punishment is what earned him the nickname Mesophase. It means hater of sunlight. See, blinding was a pretty common political move in Byzantium. It meant you couldn't rule anymore, but the emperor didn't technically have to murder you. But Andronikos used it so often and so cruelly that the name just stuck. It's the perfect, chilling summary of his reign, don't you think?
But here's the thing about ruling by fear. It's not sustainable. Eventually, the bill comes due. And all the terror Andronikos had unleashed at home had left the empire incredibly weak and exposed to its enemies.
And everything started to fall apart at once. The West was furious about the massacre and wanted revenge. His purge of the nobility meant he'd also killed off most of his best generals. So when the attacks came, the empire was a mess. Hungary invades from the north. A renegade cousin, Isaac Komnenos, just up and steals the island of Cyprus for himself. The empire was literally crumbling.
The knockout punch lands in the summer of 1185. The king of Sicily, William II, invades. He says it's partly revenge for the Latin massacre. His army marches right across Greece and attacks Thessaloniki, the empire's second biggest city. It falls, and the sack is horrific. Something like 7,000 people are slaughtered. For the Byzantine people, this was an unthinkable disaster, and it was all on Andronikos' watch.
When the news of Thessaloniki reached Constantinople, it was pure panic. The same people who had hailed Andronikos as their champion now saw him as the reason for their doom. The fear he had weaponized for so long was about to blow up in his face.
And his end came so fast, it's dizzying. Deep in his paranoia, he asks a fortune teller who's going to replace him. The name he gets is Isaac Angelos, a distant relative. So of course, Andronikos orders him arrested and executed immediately. But when the soldiers show up, Isaac, figuring he's dead anyway, fights back, kills the lead agent, and runs to the biggest church in the city, the Hagia Sophia. He begs the people for help, and the city just erupts. The mob declares Isaac the new emperor on the spot. Andronikos makes a run for it, tries to escape on a boat, but he's caught. The game was up.
Now, the new emperor, Isaac, does something very clever. He doesn't just execute Andronikos quietly. No. He hands him over to the mob. He gives the people of the city exactly what they want, a chance to tear their former hero apart. And that's where we came in.
So, what was the fallout from his reign? Well, it was the end of the Komnenian dynasty, a family that had ruled for over a century. But it was so much more than that. He left behind a hollowed-out aristocracy, which meant the military command was a wreck. He poured gasoline on the fire of hatred between the Eastern and Western churches. And all this chaos, it basically laid out a welcome mat for the Fourth Crusade to come and sack Constantinople itself just 19 years later.
You see, for about 100 years before him, the Komnenian emperors had managed to pull the empire back from the brink. They'd restored its power and prestige. Andronikos, in just a few short, violent years, slammed the door on all of it. He triggered a downward spiral from which the Byzantine Empire would never, ever truly recover.
So, that's the question we're left with, isn't it? Was he a genuine reformer who thought he had to be brutal to save a dying state? Was it a case of the ends justifying the means, even if those means were monstrous? Or was he just a charismatic madman, a tyrant whose hunger for power destroyed everything he touched? That's the bloody, complicated story of Andronikos Komnenos, the emperor who was torn to pieces.